My name's David Orr. I'm the director here with the LTAP Center here in New York State. We're the Cornell Local Roads program. Been here for a while at Cornell University, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun. So this is the penultimate, which always sounds like the last, but it's the next to last of our foundational webinars for this winter season. We'll have one more next week on pavement maintenance. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to be doing some polls using pollev.com. So pollev.com/DavidOrrPE. Now, what we recommend for folks is if you can, down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat. Click on the chat. Now, that's a one way. That's for us to send you information today. But the chat's useful because in just a minute, the handout link, the link to pollev are going to pop up in the chat. And therefore, you don't have to type all that stuff in, okay? Because there's a handout. The handout has in it sort of an outline of what we're talking about today, a bunch of resources, and a list of all of our webinars. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. You also do want to open up the Q&A. I am going to ask you to put stuff in the Q&A, so open up your Q&A pod, and I may ask you to raise your hands now and then. So we get going here. This is worth 1 PDH in New York State. Okay, only the person who is registered gets the credit for that. So unless you had set up something ahead of time, it's only the person registered, and it is considered a course, which is cool. It's not just an educational activity. Now, if you're from another state, which we'll find out here in a minute, you'll need to check with your LTAP center to see what's going on. Now, in terms of what we're up to here at in good old Ithaca on a rainy day, well, for spring, a lot of you are probably getting ready to go to Advocacy Day, but we're getting ready for our spring training season. We got 6 workshops topics this spring, one of them being drainage. This hour is really just sort of a foundational, whet your appetite. We really want to see you at the drainage workshops, and you can see we're going everywhere from Long Island out in Suffolk County all the way over to Ontario County. So we hope to see you there. We do have one more, as I say, webinar coming up next week on flagging. Flagging? No, pavement maintenance. Watch this. I can come in here and fix that if the computer won't fight me too much. Let's do this. We'll make that white. Come on, computer. There you go. Make Mr. Rondinero unhappy with me. Pavement maintenance is next week. We do have an online workshop on federal aid coming up, and then we are going to be announcing our engineering level, PDH level workshops in July and August on ADA and project management issues. Now, if you're wondering, we also do some workshops in the fall. We'll have some snow and ice in addition to everything else, but we hope to see you out there. Okay, so let's get ourselves started, and we're going to start with some polls. So again, pollev.com/DavidOrrPE. If you can't use the polls, and I know a lot of you can't, go ahead and put it into the Q&A, and I'll at least add that to my mental thinking of who do we have on the call today. So who do you work for? Okay, now I cleared this yesterday. Why is it not cleared? Give me a sec, folks. I'm going to clear my responses and make you do it again. So I'm going to hate to do that. I'm going to make you do it again. So who do we got? We've got some engineering consultants. We've got folks with state and federal, some city and village, some town, county folks. Cool. Good variety. I like it. And we have a bunch of you that are honest and work for the weekend. Okay. And then over in the Q&A, I see a few. We got a consultant, a city, a town. Okay. Good. We got a good variety of folks. I like it. Okay. Let's go to the next one. This one got cleared. Oh, interesting. So what's your job? Are you an administrator, a highway superintendent, an engineer, a supervisor, a board member, or none of the above? And I suspect we'll see a lot of engineers because there's a PDH here. If you do put in none of the above, do me a favor and throw that into, and I see some have already done that, throw that into the Q&A form. So we got a project manager. And let's see what else we got here. And we have a designer, supervisor. Okay. Okay. So we got a variety of folks. Cool. And then finally, how long have you been in your current position? Less than a month, less than a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, and you've been there so long, your hair has changed color. I get to check that one. Wow, we have somebody who's brand new. Well, welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Nice to see. And we have some people putting in 20 years, 5 years, 11 to 20, 5 to 10. Okay. So concentration is actually relatively low. So that's actually not bad. We got 1 to 2, 3 to 5, and 5 to 10 being the majority of you. But we do have some folks who've been around a while and some brand new folks. And again, welcome aboard. Now let's see. We'll see if we get anybody in Lake Ontario today. And this particular one's pretty cool. You actually get to click where you're from. And again, you can put it in the Q&A, but it's sort of fun on the map. Just click and you'll actually see where you're from. So we got a bunch of folks on Long Island, some folks up near Cortland and Syracuse, Buffalo, Albany. Well, we got a good variety of folks. Okay, and then we have some people adding in. We got Long Island, Warren County, Binghamton. Okay, all over the state. But the only places we don't have, there's our Lake Ontario friend. We got some Canadians. Okay, a couple of folks living on the lakes there, Erie and Ontario. Okay, cool. That actually helps me get a sense of where you're from and some things we'll talk about going from there. But again, we're going to be near you with drainage this spring, so we hope to see you on there. Now, why do we care about drainage? Well, like it or not, drainage defines quality of the road in a lot of ways. You take care of the water, you're taking care of most of your problems. Okay, so let's take care of the drainage. Now, I have no idea why the computer has decided to add an icon for me. It's not on my computer, but we'll just live with the weird icons fighting with me today. We got 2 things we've got to worry about. We got to worry about runoff, rain today, snow normally in the winter when that melts, and we have to worry about the roadway and the roadside. Okay, so these are all things we have to worry about. Okay, now when it comes to drainage, obviously we want to graduate and we want to win. We want to deal with some typical problems. Okay, so let's see what's going on here, and we'll go from there. Okay, now some typical drainage problems. I'm going to give you a couple to start. I want to get your feedback. We're going to do this via a poll, but again, you can use the Q&A. Let's see what you think of for some typical drainage problems, what you would do. Okay, so in this case, what's the solution? So I'll let you, I'm going to go back to the picture. You can type in your answer, and I'll come right back to this in just a second. So what would you do here? What do you think the solution to this road failure is? So let's give you about 10, 15 seconds to type in an answer. And again, you can always use the Q&A. And then I'm going to go back to the screen and see what's going on. Okay. See what you got. Start over. Oh, poor subgrade. Cry. No crying. This isn't baseball, but still no crying in baseball. Eliminate the road. Runoff out of control. Maybe upsize your culverts. Conveyance. Yeah, there's all kinds of things to think about. Pray. Oh, I like that one. This is actually one of those things where you need to think about where the water is coming from and where it's going to. Now, while we're dealing with surface and subsurface water, most of us think of, oh, we're just dealing with runoff off the land. But remember, water is very powerful. It never takes a day off. Okay, so we go back and look at our roadway and we think about what's going on there. We've got ourselves a situation where, well, frankly, if you look at the roadway, you can see that this became a stream. Okay, I'll see if my pen decides. Play nicely. Yeah, there we go. This became a stream going right down the road. Okay. And in fact, what happened was the road had been there for a long time. It had become incised. Look at a lot of your road system. The road is slowly, especially gravel roads, gotten incised into the land. And what happened was the road became the stream bed. And so when the storm came along, one of those hurricanes we got about 10 years ago, it literally stayed in the roadway. You need to think about where's the water going? Can you get it off to the side? When they reconstructed the road the second time, they actually raised it up in a few spots and put some little places for the water to go off. So even if they lost part, they wouldn't lose the entire roadway. So think about the water, where the water is coming from and where it's going to. Okay. And yeah, someone put in there, raise the road. Yeah. And yes, they had to do full reconstruction, but they did it twice before they solved the problem. Let's do one more. And then we'll start talking about some lessons to be learned here. Okay. Okay, and again, we'll add to the solutions that are here. In fact, I can clear the ones we have and let you start over. And we'll go back to the picture for just a second. Okay, let's see what you came up with here. Okay. So let's see what you got. Survey says answers check dams, maybe in the ditch. Okay, that's one possibility. Better super elevation. Actually, surprisingly, the super elevation is not too bad there. Vegetation might help, but there's certain times of years when, well, we get low vegetation, especially when, look at the fines. Ooh, somebody's starting to think here. Repave. Okay. Add additional drainage. There's all kind of things you can think about. Now, obviously, with a photograph, there's, you're sort of guessing in some respects. The road's coming around the hill. It'd been a gravel road for decades, as long as anybody could remember, but the traffic volume had started to go enough where they really wanted to hit it with a surface, so they chip sealed it. Well, the problem is when they chip sealed it, they had too many fines. It had been a good gravel surface, wasn't a good base, and the road blew itself apart. The ditch is fine. The super is actually not great, but not bad for the traffic volume. And the real problem was the base material itself. So let's take those two examples and let's have a little bit of thinking about roadways. And of course, we know drainage makes all the difference in the world, okay? So let's talk about that for a second, and we'll get our video going. You've seen this video before if you've seen much, and we'll talk more about some of these things in the full workshop.
This video was shot by the U.S. Forest Service during some testing they did in the.
But let's watch the two green dots.
See here was laid just to see how the breakdown of tape.
You see the two green dots? The pavement's actually moving under traffic, okay? Every road does this. The more water there is, the heavier the traffic, the thinner the pavement, the more movement you're going to get, the faster that roadway is going to fail. This particular roadway was designed to fail, and they did a good job. It failed in only 81 passes, but it had a high water table and a very thin surface. We need to take care of the drainage. The drainage alone would have more than doubled the life of that particular pavement. You've got to take care of the water. Water is not the enemy, though. It's excess water. And again, for our 1 hour together, we can't cover this a lot, but we can certainly cover it in a lot more detail when we do the full day workshop. Now, one of the biggest things we have to make sure of is that we've got a good crown on the roadway. Got to get the water off. Okay, the water can't get off the roadway. It's going to go into the roadway, and you're going to have excess water. That's going to lead to premature failure. Now, in terms of the kind of cross slope we'd like to have, well, it depends on the surface type. So I told you I might ask you to raise your hand. Okay, so how many of you have gravel roads in your system? Raise your hand if you've got gravel roads that you manage in your system. Okay, we've got quarter, not quite a quarter of you so far. No, a little under a quarter. Getting close to a quarter. Okay, so about 1/6 of you have some gravel roadways. For a gravel road, you're going to need to have a steeper cross slope to move that water off to the side. So on a gravel road, when my pen decides to wake up here, there we go. You're going to want to have about a 6% cross slope, okay, for a flat, straight section of highway. By the way, for those who care, that's 3/4 of an inch per foot. Okay. But if you've got a paved roadway, you don't need to be so steep. In fact, if it's too steep, you'll get erosion at the shoulder. So typically we say 2% for a hot mix, maybe a 4% for a chip seal or a cold mix. Okay. And then of course the shoulders should have additional slope to them as well. And by the way, for those who care, 2%, you can probably do the math, is a 1/4 inch per foot, and 4% is 2/4 or 1/2 inch per foot. Now, one of the things that's cool about this is if whatever the surface is, the same cross slope can be used for the subgrade, it'll still carry the water. It does make a difference. You definitely want to have a cross slope on those lower layers, okay? This is very important for a couple of reasons, not the least of which obviously is drainage. That's what we're talking about today. So let's look at a good example of that. This photograph was taken in the Adirondacks many, many years ago. Yeah, I know it's an old photograph, but it illustrates the point perfectly. Next time you're on a gravel roadway, as you're driving down the road, look for potholes. And if you see potholes, it might be the quality of the gravel, It might be heavy traffic, but a lot of times it's the flat roadway. You don't have that crown. You don't have that cross slope, okay? Somebody has come in and they flattened it, or you've transitioned around the corner and you made a flat spot, or you made a bread loaf where you actually sort of got a flat middle and then a steep on the sides. Anytime you get a flat section in a gravel roadway, you're going to get potholes. They're much more likely to form when you've got a flat section of highway. You got to have a crown. There's nothing in the rules that says you can't have a crown going all to one side if need be, especially on a gravel roadway. Okay, obviously it would depend on the width, but you got to get that road off. Now, if you're interested, if you really want some good information on gravel roads, we have some links on our website. We have some videos. So if you have gravel roads, for the 6 of you that do, there's some pretty cool stuff out there, and there's lessons to be learned, okay? Now, one of the biggest things with a gravel road is you got to have the correct shape, okay? So here's an illustration. This is out of our friends from the South Dakota LTAP Center. And so a gentleman who's since retired, the guru of gravel roads, and he talks a little bit about the danger of having that flat top surface on the gravel roadway and the quality of the gravel throughout this little particular DVD, okay? But you got to have the same drainage pattern on a gravel road that you have on a paved road, but you're going to have a slightly different surface because of the nature of the way the water runs off of that particular surface. So keep that in mind. And of course, we always think about safety. When we do drainage classes, we think safety. We do safety classes, we think about drainage. Those two things really are important to think about, okay? So again, make sure you've got a good crown, make sure you've got a good slope, and especially on a gravel road, don't get yourself a flat spot in the center, or you're going to leave yourself potholes. I mean, heck, even in this video, they sort of show a rounded shape, which tends to lead to potholes, okay? Now we'll move on and we'll look at a good example of what not to do. Not only is there no crown here, the ditches are partially plugged, it's flooding all over the place. All of that alone would make the road in pretty bad shape. Let's add on top of it, no gravel, okay? When you're looking at a roadway, you really need to have some gravel. That's pretty important. The quality of the material you're using is pretty darn important. I hit this with a vehicle that we had, an old van, and I could have hit it at about 35 miles an hour and buried the thing right up beyond its axles. Instead, I sort of noticed it didn't look great and carefully drove in and created the rut in the lower left corner. And in fact, let's go look at that rut in a little more detail. You can see it's pretty deep. The only saving grace, the only reason that I didn't get in worse shape was I went slow. I went back and I checked, there was no gravel in there. The material had clay, mostly silt, and a little bit of sand. But there was nothing larger than a 1/4 inch in the whole pack. It was just a mess. So when you're looking at your roadway, you really need to have good quality material. We spend a lot of money on asphalt. Asphalt is not cheap, and yet the real money needs to be spent on the gravel, and that's where we need to be spending our money because it's cheaper and it's easier to manipulate. Part of the problem, of course, is getting good gravel, and that is getting harder. But if you look at it from a standpoint of your gravel, sand, and your fines, your silt and clay combined, essentially what you need is, no matter what, you need about, 50 to 70% gravel, okay? So that's this section over here. Nope, gotta get my pen turned back on. So that's over here. You need 50 to 70% gravel, okay? That's the good stuff. That's the stuff you drive on. That's the things essentially 1/4 inch to 3 inches. Those are the rocks you're actually driving on. Even in a hot mix pavement, you're driving on rocks, okay? You need about 25 to 40% sand, okay? And I should go ahead to be consistent. I'll do this here. To fill in the voids, still pretty good for drainage, good shape, right? Now, in terms of silt and clay, you need some in your gravel roads. Those who raised your hands earlier, for your gravel roads, you need some silt and clay because that's your binder. That's what's holding it together, because in a dry period, if you don't have that, traffic is just going to cause it to ravel and move and create all kinds of problems, washboards and stuff like that. The problem is those fines hold water. And if they hold water and you cover them over with a surface, that water can't go anywhere. It can't evaporate out. and it just sits there and becomes excess water, and the roadway becomes too soft. So what we found is, in terms of your fine content, especially in glacial tills, which is most of New York, you need to have less than 8%, or you're going to have problems. And truth be told, if it's really important, you really want to be down under 5%. That would be optimum. Okay. Now, again, for those of you who do have gravel roads, you're going to want to have 8 to 15%. Okay. You need some fines to help hold things together. Notice there's no overlap. Yeah, there are some perfect materials that will do both jobs, but generally you got a good gravel surface, it's been holding up, it's not too dusty in the summer, it doesn't create problems in the spring. You cover it right up, you're probably going to have problems. And if you've got roads that every year have potholes, every year have drainage issues, do a test pit, take a check, take a core. You might find your fines content's higher than you'd like it to be. Okay, absolutely vital for a good roadway. And with the proper drainage on the side and the proper material, roads can last for a really, really long time with a relatively thin pavement. And of course, as you'll hear next week in the pavement maintenance webinar, and by the way, we have that workshop on the road as well, you got to do those treatments sooner rather than later. The treatment here is not to overlay this. It's too late. You're really going to have to grind that material out, check the drainage underneath before you do anything on top, because those cracks will come right back through. About 1 year per inch for your overlay. And at over $100,000 per inch per mile, that's a lot of money. Okay. So you got to take care of the drainage. Okay. So this photograph was taken on a road. I won't say where the road is, but in the Q&A, somebody tell me what you think the agency who owns this road did the day after I took the photograph. See if somebody in the Q&A wants to tell me what they did the day after. What did they do the day after? They filled the pothole. They should have filled the pothole. They didn't. They should have patched it. Resurfaced. Somebody got it. Yeah, they resurfaced it. They overlaid the thing the day after. And the worst part is, the part that some of you caught, is the fact that, let me get a in color you can see. I'm going to go with yellow. Okay, right there. That's not just a pothole. That's actually water. There was actually water coming out of the roadway, and they overlaid it. Of course, you know what, it came pretty quickly, just a few years, it became a pothole again. Okay, I'm a huge fan of crack repairs. We don't do enough of them. This is not a good candidate for crack repair. Okay, as you'll hear more about next week, and if you come to the workshop, you got to have relatively thin cracks. You got to get to them sooner than you might like. Okay, absolutely vital to do the right repair at the right place at the right time and to do it well. So let's talk about shoulders. This is actually not a bad looking shoulder. Yeah, there's a little sand towards the end of the winter, but not a bad shoulder. What do you think a shoulder does for us? I'm going to put over here the purpose of shoulders. I'm going to see what you guys think, what the purpose of a shoulder is. And again, the hint, I'll give you a picture of a pretty darn good shoulder. Okay, so let's see what you came up with for the purpose of shoulders. Let's see what you come up with. Support the pavements, channel, runoff. Okay. Move the water away. Snow storage. Ooh, that's pretty good. Okay. I'm looking for one more thing. It's all moving around. I'm looking for one more thing. Ah, there it goes. There it is. Safety. Okay, cool. Road shoulders do 4 things for us. Okay. Number 1, they provide lateral support. Compacted shoulders hold the pavement in. Okay. Otherwise, you get edge cracking on the asphalt. Even in an urban area with curb and gutter, that properly placed curb provides lateral support for the pavement. Okay. Number 2, it moves the water away from the roadway into your slopes and stuff like that. In fact, let's go look at a good shoulder when we talk about this. And then, obviously, we've got the issue of snow storage. in most winters, we have to deal with snow. But I'm glad somebody put safety in there. Shoulders are a part of the safety of the roadway because, let's face it, people get off the roadway. They're driving with this tool in front of their face, okay? They errantly pull off. One mistake shouldn't lead to a serious crash or fatality. So I said, we like to talk about safety. It's a place for safety. It's a place for the random errant vehicle. But when we look at this shoulder, no, this shoulder isn't going to do anything for anybody. I mean, it's not really providing lateral support because while it's been built up, there was no compaction. There's no lateral push. Water can't get off, couldn't store snow there. And if a vehicle did go off this, I hate to say it, we'd be getting into a Dukes of Hazzard, launch into the air kind of thing, okay? And if I want to, I can fill in the cracks. Let me see here. Yeah, I'll just do a couple of them. I mean, you can see there's a whole bunch of cracks. Oh, there's a crack here, there's a crack there, there's a crack. I mean, it'd take me a while. I could be spending it the rest of our hour together trying to fill in all the cracks, okay? So good shoulders help us. And of course, that extra cross slope is helpful at the end of the winter because without that extra cross slope, if it does build up a little bit, the water can pond. And the only people who like that are ice skaters, okay? Now I did take, when I took this photograph, I had a fleet vehicle. I was driving, getting pictures for the class. I actually took the ice scraper out of the car and I made a little groove for the water to drain out to the side so it wouldn't pond up and freeze in the middle of the night. And then I let the agency know. The problem was it was Friday. Happened to be up in the Adirondacks on a Friday. And so, yeah, we want to take care of the water and get it off the roadway. So it means you need to have good cross slope. You need to cut your shoulders with your grader. Please don't cut your shoulders with a snowplow. That's what was done here. You can actually see where the edge of the snowplow was, but you can see the water is actually going back under the roadway. You can actually see that it's saturated here, okay? You can also see, if you look carefully, there's a couple of spots that have already started to crack. Very light, fine cracks, but those are going to be potholes relatively soon. And then, of course, all this debris. Before I was with Cornell, I was with Yates County. And there are a lot of things I miss. I really liked the job. One thing I never miss, though, I still don't miss, and that's that phone call from that irate homeowner. And you can't defend that. You can't say, well, you just have to go clean it up. And you just have to take it. So cut their shoulders, get them off the roadway. Now, how many of you, again, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. So I'm going to lower everybody's hands here. Let me find my mouse. Where'd my mouse go? There's my mouse. Going to lower everybody's hands. How many of you have curb and gutter in your system? Raise your hand if you've got curb and gutter you deal with. And again, you may have gravel and curb and gutter. I'm okay with that. That's actually fairly common, more common than we think. Heck, the city of Ithaca has roads that are dirt and, of course, shoulders and curbs. Okay, so about a third of you are raising your hand that you've got curb and gutter. Same drainage patterns occur when it comes to dealing with curbs and gutters, okay? So you still want to get water off to the side. So maybe you want to go ahead and put in some subsurface drains underneath, okay? So you may want to go ahead and put in subsurface drains while you're doing that to drain the water off, because you still want that water to go off to the side. You can't put it into ditches, so you got to put it into subsurface drains, okay? You still want to use the same quality material here, okay? So you want to have a good base. You still need to have a cross slope. You still need to take that water away. All the same rules occur. The only difference is with a curb section, where you take that excess water that gets into your roadway is your storm sewer system. So you're going to either have to find a way to outlet these, you may have that, or you're going to have to feed your subsurface drains into your stormwater system. Just be aware, however, if you need animal guards, you might want to put some screens or animal guards because the critters like the end of plastic pipes. They go up them pretty easily, okay? Now we have this photograph that we get permission to show. It's a guy by the name of Jay Olson. It's a picture in Saratoga Springs, and his quote is, "Drainage is critical for roadway design. Ducts are an indicator of poor drainage." We really don't want to have standing water along the roadway because that water at best is evaporating, but much more likely it's going through the asphalt, through any cracks in the asphalt, along the edge of the roadway, and you're going to wind up with problems, okay? So in terms of the quality of the AC, it doesn't really matter, okay? So now somebody put in the Q&A talking about porous asphalt. We're not going to talk about porous asphalt too much today, but you may have heard that term. Porous asphalt essentially is a special mix that lets water go through it, okay? It's usually used in parking lots, though if you go up to Lake George, you'll actually see a whole stretch in front of the beach that's all porous asphalt. And they have to have special subsurface catchments to take that water and put it into the stormwater system. It becomes part of the drainage structure. Has to be designed well. You got to keep the surface clean. There's ways you have to treat it in the winter. You don't want to plug up the pores with sand. Can be part of your drainage pattern. And I wish we had time, but we got 1 hour together. But something to think about. Porous asphalt can be used. We have a couple of parking lots here at Cornell that have them. The big thing there is that they're not huge fans of a lot of turning movements. And so a parking lot, be a little wary. You might want to make the aisles regular pavement and porous where the people park. But it's, again, part of the overall process to deal with. Now, we also had at Cornell, this is one of the main roads. It's actually Tower Road that goes up through campus. And this is an older design. A lot of our older systems look like this. You got a catch basin, and there's one catch basin here at the bottom of the photograph, okay? And find my mouse again. Hello, there's Mr. Mouse. Okay, we got one catch basin down here at the bottom, okay? And we've got another catch basin all the way up here, just below the bus, about one per block. Nowhere near enough catch basins, nowhere for the water to go. And on a rainy day, the water would pond up. And the only reason it got into this particular catch basin was badly cracked. You got to get the water off the roadway. Now, this is what the roadway looks like today. And you can see, just even in this photograph, there's already, you can see one catch basin here. There's a drainage. They put it into a bioswale over on the left. Over here, there's another entrance right there. There's another catch basin here. So where there used to be one place for the water to get off on each side, there's at least two now, okay? And the nice thing about doing this is you get the water off the road pretty quickly. You reduce the drainage. In this case, they actually put it where they've got those plants, and the plants do a lot of the work of taking care of the pollutants, drain the water. But again, you got to have positive drainage and good drainage materials underneath, okay? Now let's go back and just not forget about our friends in gravel roads, and actually any paved roads as well. In the winter, you may get some movement of water, okay? Now, this is in Vermont and gravel road, and they get a lot of frost heaving. Now, if you get frost heaving in your community in most winters, this year's not been a bad one for frost heaving, though it's had its own issues. What's happening is the water is coming up from underneath, okay? Now, this is a video that we did down in our lab space to illustrate things. And I'm going to watch. We're going to pour some water into a reservoir at the bottom. The tube is filled with a fine mason sand, okay? So let's pour the water in and watch. This is time lapse over a couple of hours. And you can actually see the water gets pulled up against the force of gravity. It's pretty cool, okay? Now we could do this with different materials. You'll get different capillary heights that you'd have to get, okay? So after 1 hour, you can see where it's gotten to, okay? And so it's actually pretty cool. You can see the effect of different materials and different amount of frost heaving that's going on, okay? Now, what's happening in the winter is essentially we're getting water coming out by this capillarity. The finer the material, the higher the capillary draw. You're getting freezing coming down from above, and you get lenses of ice. And those are pure lenses of ice, okay? Now, just to illustrate this in terms of the lenses of ice, this was done by some colleagues in the Army Corps of Engineers. They have a freezing cabinet. They do the same experiment, but this time they have the top is above freezing, the bottom is, excuse me, the top is below freezing and the bottom is above freezing. And watch what happens now to that same water that gets pulled up. Remember, the water is getting pulled up from underneath. Okay, and I'm going to skip just a little bit ahead. Starts out at 19% water. You can see the lenses of ice are being formed. And what I want to do is notice at the end of the experiment, they went from 19 to 55% water content. Okay. All that's just water that gets pulled up. You know, at best, it would heave 10% if it wasn't for this capillarity issue, this pulling the water up and the freezing coming from above, okay? And then, of course, you can get a lot of heaving, 4 inches out of 6, that's a lot of heaving. But notice, let me go into here. There is an example of what you can see in the field. You'll see lenses of ice, and those are pure lenses of ice that are formed, okay? That's 3/4 of an inch thick, pure ice. And if you've ever dug a culvert up in the winter, you may come across these huge lenses of ice. If you clean off the surface, you could put that in your soda and drink it. You know, okay, maybe we wouldn't want to do that. But the point is, it is literally just water. Whatever the water quality was underneath, that's the water you got there in your lens of ice. Now, what roads are frost susceptible? Well, the roads that are frost susceptible have to have freezing temperatures. They have to have the material that is frost susceptible, okay? And lastly, you have to have free water available, capillarity, pulling the water up. Now, how far does that happen? Well, if you've got silts and clays, it could be feet. I mean, a silt will pull water up 5, 6 feet with no problem. Clay even more, okay? So if you got free water near the surface and you got cold temperatures, you can get frost heaves. And you could just put signs up, but we can do better than that, okay? Now, in terms of what we can do, we have to think about the situations that we're in. Now, this happens to be in Thindera, Old Forge, whatever you want to call it, up in the Adirondacks. I took this photograph coming back. The state had just paved the roadway. Now, this is a tough challenge. I always thought the state had a really almost impossible challenge, because if you know this particular site and you just look at it carefully, and I'll help you out, you can actually see there's actually a culvert that runs diagonally right there. There's actually a culvert that runs diagonally, and it's shallow. It's a shallow culvert, the box culvert, actually. It's not moving when frost heaving occurs. It's not going anywhere. The problem is the ground around it, the subgrade material, the native material, tends to heave and move, especially in the winter, okay? So by the time the following spring it occurred, you can still see the culvert. There it is, running diagonally, okay? It didn't move, but the ground moved up around it, okay? And this can occur for a lot of agencies. Here's an example of one on a town road, okay? Actually, it might even be a county road because it does have a yellow stripe on it, but I don't think they paved the yellow stripe with a dip in it. It occurred because of this capillarity creating frost heaving. The culvert didn't move because we backfilled it with good material. The road around it moved, and we get a problem in the winter. Now, how do we solve this? The best thing to do would be to use non-frost susceptible materials. That would be optimum. We'd love to do that, okay? And non-frost susceptible goes back to our chart. That's why I showed you the chart. What we found was if you keep that fines content less than 8%, most of your frost heaving problem goes away, okay? Most, not all, but most of it, okay? Now, of course, it still holds a little too much water in some cases, which is when we really like 5%, but 8% gets rid of most of the frost problem, okay? But if we go back up and look at our example we have with our culvert installation, how you install that culvert matters as well, because if you use really clean material that doesn't move, but the ground around it still moves, you can still get a differential movement. So how you backfill the culvert? Use the same material, spread that out with a large excavation. There's lots of things you can do to reduce that frost heaving that's going on in your particular case, okay? So keep these things in mind. Now, in terms of the quality underneath your roadway, another reason we like to have good quality base is we don't want to see this. This is spring. And again, I said earlier, if you've got a roadway that looks like this every spring and potholes and doesn't seem to last no matter what you put on the surface, you might want to go and check what's going on underneath, okay? Check the gravel. Now, when are pavements strongest? That's a question that we get asked actually quite often. Are pavements strongest in the summer? Actually, no. In a normal winter, your pavement's strongest when it's frozen. I mean, you can drive a truck over a lake, and they did that during World War II, and you probably heard of ice road truckers up in Canada. When it's frozen, roads are really, really strong. The problem, of course, is if there's a lot of capillarity, if there's a lot of silt and clay that pull the water up, that water has actually saturated the soil. Yeah, it's frozen, but it's got excess water. And when it thaws in the spring, it doesn't thaw nice and evenly. All that water sits in the roadway, has nowhere to go until it's completely thawed. Okay? Now, in the Q&A, let's see if somebody can tell me, why do I show the shoulders taking longer to thaw than the main line? Which is the most common thing you see. Why do I show the shoulders staying frozen while the center thaws and you got all that extra water? Why do the shoulders take longer? Some of it's doing the sun, okay, it heats from the top down, okay. More exposure to cold because you got a black surface and the shoulders don't have that. There's no friction from the traffic. There's no heat from the traffic. Yeah. There's two more things I'm looking for. Let's see if they pop in here. We store it with snow on it. That actually helps insulate and keep the pavement frozen. That snow storage actually can help keep it frozen. Yeah, that's one. Okay, blacktop heats up faster. And then the other one that we do, and we did this for decades, it was the standard for many old roadways, in fact. Whether it's good or bad, the standard was when you built the roadway, the material in the shoulder didn't need to be as good since there was no traffic. So if I did a cross section, I would have good material here, and then I pave over that, and I put poor quality shoulder material down because it's only the shoulder, right? And then I pave the whole thing. Well, the problem is, if this is clean and holds only, say, 5% fines, good clean stuff, but this over here is 12% fines, cheap stuff, the water can't, not only can it get out, it's going to hold more fines, stay frozen longer. Okay, so it's catch-22. And of course, where's that water going to go? Well, it's going to lead to potholes. It's going to take care of all kinds of issues. It could do this. We got this picture from Jim Markle out of Albany County. I said, Jim on here? I wonder if Jim's on here. Let's go see if Jim's on here today. He sometimes shows up. I don't see Jim on there today, but Jim, thank you for the photograph. This is a frost boil. Essentially, in the spring, you get water coming up and it comes right out in the roadway. And it's pure water. Remember those pure lenses of ice? When they melt, they produce pure water, and that's pure water coming up. Okay? So you got to take care of what's going on underneath. Now, there are some other things you can think about. Sometimes we have to build across some really soft soils. We know that. That happens. Big deal. There are things we can do. We can spread that out. We could build a corduroy roadway. This is the modern version of the corduroy roadway where you put in a geocell and you backfill the geocell with a gravel. Okay. I actually like that technique. It's a pretty cool technique. The only thing I don't like that I see here, what you do is essentially when you're building the roadway, you come in here and you put in the geocell to spread the load out. So you've got your subgrade, you still want a cross slope on it, and then you put this geocell material down, and then you backfill that with whatever gravel. Doesn't have to be the nice clean stuff like you see in the photograph, though I'm not sure how clean it really is. The thing we recommend is underneath, and let me change my pen color so you can sort of see what I'm talking about. I'm going to make that, let's do light green, that should do. What we recommend is you actually put fabric between the subgrade and the geocell and go beyond the geocell. Because any fines you've got might want to pump up and contaminate whatever's in your geocell. And if that happens, or the geocell gets soft, it can actually roll over. So you can see they did put fabric here, but they really should have extended that fabric out beyond the edge of the geocell. And then you fill that in, you build your road on top of it, and it's a modern version of the corduroy roadway. Now, you don't have to use fancy geocells. You can just do it with fabric and big rock, a drainage blanket layer. That can actually work pretty well. The biggest concern is you still want to think about the drainage and compaction. In this particular case, the rocks that they used were cheap, but they weren't crushed. And so they really couldn't get them compacted because the subgrade was really soft. So they tried to put in all the rocks, and the green's not going to show up here. So let me change the color here. Let's see. We'll go with Actually, we'll go with black here, because I can actually see that. They tried to put in rocks that were like 8 inches thick. Then they put a gravel layer on top of that. That was at least 6 inches and probably a little bit more. And they tried to compact 14 inches of material. I don't care what roller you've got, 14 inches of material is a lot to compact, and you're not really going to get the compaction that you want. Okay. And eventually traffic will finish the job of compaction and you'll get some rutting. Okay. So, because of course it only compacts in the wheel path. So this is something to think about. Make sure you can construct it. And of course, whatever fabric you do use, make sure you're using the right kind of fabric. There's woven and non-woven fabrics. And again, we can have a long discussion about that. The big key here is make sure it's puncture resistant. Make sure that you understand what its purpose is for separating and keeping the fines out of your roadway. Because the one thing you don't want to do, like they had to do in this operation, is dig up brand new fabric. It's a pain. Okay, so you really want to put in the right material and do it right. Now, one of the things we can think about doing is doing some kind of subsurface drainage. In urban areas, we talked earlier, you have to do that. Subsurface drainage can be very helpful, okay, that you see like right here. Oh, dark black on blue doesn't work too well, does it? Let's change that to white again, or yellow. Okay, so a subsurface drain could be very useful right here. You could also put in the same quality material in the shoulder, a free draining layer. That will help. You'll still get some thawing slow down in the subgrade, but it can really help the base to drain out to the side. And it's cheaper in the long run if you can put it in. If you're not in an urban area or something like that. The more common problem that we see, though, is that roadways have evolved, okay? Roadways over time have gotten wider. They started as gravel, then we paved them, then we made them wider and wider and wider. And that works great if we widen them properly. But if, on the other hand, the original roadway was only this wide with good gravel, and then this was dirty gravel that we put in earlier, and we just widened it by paving it wider, it looks great on the surface, but the water can't get out. It has nowhere to go. It can't get through that dirty shoulder material. And if you want to see what that looks like, there you go. That's exactly what it looks like. Here's a roadway. The center is probably pretty good material. In fact, it used to be a state road before the state gave it as a gift to the county in question. The shoulder wasn't as good, and it breaks down in the spring. You got to get the water off the roadway. The other thing you might want to think about doing is intercepting the water before it gets to the roadway. Now, a ditch can help to that to some extent. The ditch will help reduce and lower the water table a little bit, but remember, it's not going to trap everything. And if you've got much capillarity, you can still get water pulled up into your base. So you may want to think about putting in a subsurface drain. It'd be nice if it could go down to an impervious layer, but even getting down 3 or 4 feet intercepts most of the water and protects your roadway. And if you put it on both sides, you're actually draining out your base as well. And as long as you've got a good outlet, you're in pretty good shape. But remember, think about where those outlets are going to be when you're putting those things in. So those are all the kind of considerations to take care of your subsurface water. Now, one of the things people, when they put subsurface drains in, under drains as we like to call them, they have a myth out there that, oh, I'll put a subsurface drain in and I'll drain out my dirty quality gravel. Now, the problem is that doesn't work really well. You know, if I come in here and I've got a dirty gravel that is, you know, right here is say 12% fines because it was been a gravel road, pretty good gravel surface. And I stick a subsurface drain in here. Yeah, put one over here too. And the water can now drain out to the ditch. So I'll put a pipe to drain that out to the side. Hey, my problem solved, right? Remember, if it's got extra fines, it's going to hold on to extra water. Just think about picking a sponge up. You pick the sponge up, it's still holding a lot of water. You've got a dirty base, too many fines, it's going to hold on to that excess moisture. So sticking the subsurface drain in isn't really going to help us much, okay? So you really need to be thinking about using good quality gravel materials. If you've got a dirty base, subsurface drain isn't going to help you. And I've seen cases, way too many of them, where someone put in a subsurface drain and there was no water coming out of it the following spring. Okay. And they put the drain right here, right where you're supposed to on the edge of the pavement. And yet it didn't drain any water because the base itself wasn't letting the water go. You know a good location because there's water coming out when you put in the proper subsurface drain. Now, a couple of last little points, and then we'll go to our PDH questions to make everybody happy. If you've got an outlet for a subsurface drain, you do have to think about a few features. First off, you got to use the right kind of pipe. If it's exposed to the sun, plastics break down. So make sure the pipe is black. Make sure there's enough drop so that the water doesn't flow back up into your pipe. And make sure you think about the fact that critters love these things. Their claws are enough, they can go right through the plastic. You might as well put up a little sign that says home sweet home for them. This is actually a picture of a concrete end that was put for the drains around the administration building here on campus. I haven't seen Woody since COVID, so I hope he's okay. But there used to be a woodchuck who lived in there. They made him a nice little home. They built him a big concrete bunker. They put in plastic pipe, and now he's got himself a nice little home. Okay. So think about how your water is getting into your roadway. Make sure you got a good gravel base and make sure you drain that water well. There's a lot more we could talk about, but again, we got a 1 hour session that we're doing together. So what I want to do is I'm going to end our session by letting you think about solutions to some surface and subsurface problems. Give you a bit of a short graduation, then we hope to see you with the full class later this spring. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to first clear my responses. And then we go back to the picture. I'm going to ask you, what do you think the problem is and what do you think the solution is? So what are some solutions here? You can start typing them in to either the poll, which is active, or you could type them into Q&A if you can't get into the poll everywhere. And remember, it's pollev.com/David Orr PE. And yes, better shoulder drainage might help. Okay. Seal the cracks, somebody said. As we'll talk next week, those cracks are really a bit beyond what's good for sealing. They're too wide. In fact, you can actually see they've actually tried to do some repairs on this particular stretch of road already. Find my mouse. Hello, mouse. There's the mouse. Let's do, that color a little bit. So these cracks are a little bit too wide. Okay. And you can see they've tried to do the repairs. Okay. So let's see what else y'all came up with. Repair the joint and improve the subgrade. Long term, you may need to think about the subgrade. Check the cross slope. Obviously, in a photograph, it's really hard to tell. Think about seepage. Okay. Capture the water coming from the hill. Absolutely. One of the most important things. We see this a lot in these side hill situations. The original ground surface is something like this. Over here, this is a cut section. Over here, this is a fill section. And where the two meet tends to be a place you get movement. In fact, this is actually a frost-related crack, even though it happens to be in the wheel path. That's one of the reasons we like this photograph, even though it's old, because it illustrates the fact that cracks form where cracks form. Okay, so you might want to think about short-term, at least, putting in a subsurface drain, keep the water out of the roadway, reduce the frost issues until you can come in there and do a more permanent repair. Because you always have to think about what we can afford now versus what we can afford later. Something to keep in mind, okay? Yep, maybe excavate the center. Yeah, there's all kinds of things, okay? Let me show you this picture. Come over here, clear the responses. And then now I'm going to have you tell me what you would do here. You see this? What would you do in this particular case? Okay. What do you think the problem is? If you can figure out what the problem is, you got to say, where's the water coming from? Absolutely. One of the first things to do is, look, maybe an underdrain. That's a good possibility. Yep. Maybe a better subbase. Outlet the water from underneath the pavement into the subbase. We got two competing camps here. Okay, let's go back and look at our photograph and let's just ask ourselves. Let's just say we get there and we go, we got a we got a sub-base problem. Let's replace this. We'll box it out. We'll bring in some good quality gravel and we'll take care of it. Okay, that's one possibility. The other possibility is, we got a water problem. Let's put an under drain in there and we'll drain that water out. We'll take care of the problem. Here's the issue. If this is a dirty gravel that's underneath, that's led to this. If it's a dirty gravel, and you come in here and you put in a subsurface drain, and I'll just put the word drain down. Remember, the drain's going to drain clean material. But if it's dirty material, you stick a subsurface drain in, it's not going to pull any of the water. Okay? If on the other hand, you said, well, we got a dirty base. Let's box it out. We'll put in some new gravel. The real problem happens to be that you're on a side hill situation and the water's coming through the clean gravel. You just replace clean with clean. You're still going to have a pothole. The solution needs to match the problem. So what the best thing to do here, if you can, is to take a test and figure out what is the fines content that you've got there right now. If it turns out to be clean, you might have a drain issue. Drain it. If it turns out to be dirty, maybe you got to box it out. Okay? So you got to be thinking about where's the water coming from. Maybe look at history. You might be able to get some information. If it heaves a lot, for instance, it's probably a dirty base. Take advantage, get some knowledge. Okay? Okay, let's do couple more here. Okay, there's our picture. I clear the responses. And I'll go see, what would you do to solve this problem? Cut the shoulders. Yeah, this should be an easy one. I hope everybody is putting in cut shoulders. Regrade shoulder. Yeah, this should be a pretty easy one. Yeah, the ditch here is fine. I mean, that's a beautiful ditch. In fact, if anything, it's bigger than we could ever see around here. Most roads don't have that nice wide a ditch. But yeah, we got to get the water off. Cut the shoulder. You might need to raise that road if you're going to pave it. But yeah, something to think about. Okay, let's go one more here. And again, I'll clear the responses and see what y'all come up with. We'll go back and show you the picture. Okay, let's see what y'all come up with for a solution on this one. This one's much more challenging. Okay, let's sort of crown the road. Okay. Profile readjustment. A better crown. Let's go back and look at our picture. Yeah, it's not the best crown. Yeah, you need to test the fines in the base. You got to look at it, maybe reconstruct it, repave it, profile adjustments. Yeah, all kinds of possibilities. Let's see what we got over here. Start all over. Maybe fines in the base. FDR, full depth reclamation. Yeah, possible. Turns out this is one of the weird ones that I've seen. Normally, when you've got clean material, that's where the good stuff is. Well, here's what had happened. The original road was here. Wasn't in too bad a shape, actually. It was in pretty good shape. It's actually relatively clean. They had widened it with dirty material. And then on the outside, the shoulder was even dirtier, really dirty material. And what's happening in this particular case is all the water was getting in the middle and trapped there, had nowhere to go. And so because people tend to drive towards the center, it became like a big waterbed, and the middle failed first, even though it was the cleanest. Now, how'd they know this? They did a test pit. And I like doing test pits, by the way, halfway across the road. You do a test pit on a slight angle, you get a good cross section. That's how they knew what they had. And when you're done, you can drain it right back into your ditch. You don't have to worry about trapping water with your test pit. What they did when they did all this, they realized, well, let's get rid of the shoulders. That stuff's junk. Take everything here, including the existing asphalt, grind it all up, blend it into a big pile, roll it back out properly. That becomes your new base. If you need to, you could add chemical or stone and do full depth reclamation. They didn't in this case. Wasn't too bad when they were done. And then they overlaid that. Yes, it cost more, but that's the highway garage up there at the top of the hill. Would look really bad on election day. Have a road last about 2 years. Okay, so keep that in mind. And yeah, do a core, fill, things like that. Okay, one last one, and then we'll be right on time and get you out of here. Hope this is a pretty easy one for you. I'm not even going to do a poll. Let's just see what somebody in the Q&A can tell me. What do you see here? It's not safe. Yeah. Somebody thought, well, we'll improve the drainage by making the ditch too deep. It didn't really help the drainage, and now it's a safety issue. And we can talk about a lot more issues when we're doing the full workshop. I just want you to think about water, but think about the fact that a lot of drainage and safety actually go hand in hand. And we actually like water. In fact, it's one of my favorite waterfalls, a little small waterfall just south of where I live. We like water, okay? So now, everybody have yourself a great day. Get outside. It's a little rainy, but it's nice and good temperatures out there. We hope to see you next week for, get this right here. Sorry, Mr. Rondanero. There's pavement maintenance. Don't ask me. We'll do a foundational webinar. It's our ultimate one next week. And then we'll be doing online workshops and our PDH workshops and our in-person workshops. We hope to see you out there. And everybody have yourself a great week. If you're going up to Albany to Advocacy Day, be safe. And we'll catch you next week on the other side. If you have any questions, send me an email. Otherwise, have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.